Happy day. All right, if you are new to the channel because of this video, my name is Matt. I am a do-it-yourselfer, maybe a little bit of a over-enthusiastic one. And on my channel, we do-it-yourself diagnostics. So we don't really do a whole lot of parts changing kind of stuff and guessing, hey, let's learn how to replace an alternator because the battery won't charge. We learn how to diagnose the actual problem using pretty much do-it-yourself tools and things like that. So if you're new to the channel, check out some of my other videos. And if you are not new to the channel, well, you have a good idea of what's coming up because you know my style. So as you are probably well aware of by now, I have a QuickJack 5000 TL that I got recently, and I absolutely love it. But what we're going to do in this video is talk a lot about some of the other home jacks that I passed up on and the reasons why as part of my research to find the best lift for my application, and I'm going to show you how to do that too. Now, I am well aware that everybody wants a lift. I know not everybody can get one for whatever reasons, depending where you live, finances, things like that. But if you are curious about it, this video will certainly answer your questions and probably motivate you more to try to get one. If you are in the market for a lift, I do believe this video will be one of the best on YouTube at helping you to ensure you make the correct decision based on your criteria and applications and things. So let's get over to talk about some car lifts. All right, we are going to do a little bit of a presentation here to get you guys all lined up on some of the criteria and decision-making process that I used for my final decision, which I am extremely happy with. And to be honest with you, I think you would be really happy no matter what direction you went in a decision for a home lift, because I think anything you get is going to be better than a jack and jack stands or ramps and things like that. But let's look at different types of lifts. There's many different design strategies, including scissor lifts, 4-post, 2-post ramps, in-ground lifts, where the lift, often this is done with scissor lifts because they often have high ground clearance, so you kind of sink them into the ground a little bit. Pit also, like an oil change place. Forklift, there are some lifts where there's one post and then long arms coming out of it like a forklift that would raise the car. Wheelbase lifts, you basically position it's more like a jack, but you position it under the tires, jack up each tire, and that way you can lift the car with having it resting on tires, and you can usually move it around. There's all kinds of different ones. Obviously, for most home mechanics, you are very limited. You are probably not going to get a full-size 2-post lift. You need really, really high ceiling height. They're very wide. They would take up a lot of garage space. 4-post lifts, typically more used with vehicle storage if you have high enough ceiling and really low-profile cars, so you can stack one car on top of the other. Typically not so much a maintenance thing. So I narrowed it down to either scissor style or 2-post style. You also have different ranges of lift heights that you'll want to consider. One of them is the low-rise lift. That actually is the one that I decided on. Again, not completely optimal, but everything's got pros and cons, and we'll go over that. This is the 5000 TL that I have, and it lifts up to 24 inches, but with some taller adapter pads that you put under the lift points, you can get it 27, 28 inches or so. Your next is the mid-rise lift. These will lift about 50 inches. This would not be enough that you can stand under the car, but as you can see with the MaxJax here, which was a major consideration for me and still is for a next lift, that is one that if you have this seat here that they can sell separately, you could actually sit under the car. With a low rise, you would absolutely have to lay on your back under the car still, but you would have plenty of room, much more than you would get with your jack stands. And then, of course, you got your high-rise lift, which you can actually physically stand under the vehicle. Obviously, this is not typically a choice for home mechanics. You would need really, really tall ceilings. I've actually got 10.5-foot ceilings, but one of the problems is the width of it is a consideration, and it would take up pretty much 2 car bays. All right, so these would be some of the criteria that I recommend you consider when choosing a lift. Obviously, one of the most important is to consider the type of work you'd be doing. If you are going to just be doing oil changes on your car, maybe tire rotations, brakes, things like that, most likely scissor lift would probably be the best. If you're only ever going to do oil changes, quite honestly, a set of ramps probably your best bet. If you're going to be doing things like engine swaps, transmission swaps, exhaust, you're going to want access to the undercarriage. So you really need to think what type of work that you're going to be doing with this thing. Also, very, very strongly recommend that you consider the ceiling height, but not just the ceiling height. Remember, the ceiling height is one thing. The height of your garage door opener is going to be your rate limiting factor. So, for example, if we look at my garage here, so if we look up at my ceilings, you'll see I've got a 3.5 car garage. I've got a dual door setup with the garage door opener right through the middle of the bays. So I could put a jack either here in my first bay or as I've chosen here to do in my second bay, although these are portable. You can move these around very easily anywhere. And then the third garage door is a single door with, of course, the garage door opener running directly over the middle of the bay. The ceilings are just about 11 feet high, which would be great for a full-size two-post lift. However, you can't lift the vehicle through the garage door opener, obviously. If you did get a lift, the best you'd be able to do is a mid-rise. Along with that, you also want to consider the dimensions on your garage and compare that with the span that the lift is going to need. A two-post lift is going to need a considerable amount of span because you have to be able to open the doors, for example. Also, not just the width of the garage, but the length of the garage is going to be a consideration. The jack that I have, the QuickJack 5000 TL, as we'll discuss later, one of the considerations you need to make with it is as it lifts, it moves forward about a foot when you go to the full rise position. If your car barely fits in your garage lengthwise, this is not going to be a very good decision for you to make because you're not going to be able to lift it without bumping into the wall or the garage door. So get the dimensions of your garage and make considerations there. Also, as you can imagine, different lifts have different maximum capacities. If you have a heavy-duty truck like Ford F-250 or something like that, you're going to want a lift that's far more capable of what mine is, rated at 5,000 pounds. You're going to want like a 7,000-pound lift. So if you're doing this on multiple vehicles, you're going to want to consider a lift that's going to have the best range. One of the issues is lifts that may have much more weight capacity will also have a higher resting height on the ground, meaning you may not get clearance on vehicles. So there's a lot of considerations when we look at the dimensions on each lift, and that was, of course, a factor in my decision. As mentioned, the resting height, if you have a low-profile vehicle like a Corvette or my Trans Am, something that's barely 3 inches off the ground, well, it's going to be a real inconvenience if you have to make modifications like ramps or boards around the lift or dig into the concrete or something to get the clearance for your car. So resting height is actually a major consideration. For me, I'm a guy of convenience. I'm thinking it defeats the purpose if I have to slightly jack up my car every time I'm going to use a lift so I can position it accordingly. It defeats the purpose, right? And as such, you've got to weigh your convenience to inconvenience ratio. Different lifts are going to have different levels of convenience with their portability, with positioning them, with operating them. You may have to do different workarounds every time you use it. And one of the things for me especially is I don't want to have some big major hassle every time I go to use the lift because it is supposed to make things easier for me. So later on in the video, I'll show you my setup that I have to optimize my efficiency using the lift. I can basically set up my lift in really under 2 or 3 minutes, honestly. And finally, there are other costs that would be associated with the lift. If you get one that's 220 volt, by the way, all the lifts I show will be 110s, but you may, of course, need to do some electrical upgrades to your house. You will need something more than a 20 amp circuit on there, so you may, again, have to upgrade your electrical. There could be some costs with that. Freight costs, some of these lifts weigh 1,000 pounds, and there's going to be significant freight cost with that. Some of the lifts require more maintenance than others. Also, the cost of installation, a 2-post lift, you're going to have to bolt that into the concrete. There is some preparation and obviously some installation involved with that, maybe some tool rentals for drilling the cement. Look at your other costs associated when you're looking at the overall cost of the lift. All right, let's look at the lifts that I considered after doing a lot of research, and I basically narrowed it down to 3 choices. And if you are in the market for a lift, most likely you're going to narrow down to these same 3 choices, most likely. The first one would be pretty much the ultimate one. That would be the MaxJax, a 2-post mid-rise lift. This would really be the ultimate, and I am still strongly considering it, but we'll talk about that a little bit later. The other one would be the BendPak MD6XP or similar. There's many scissor lifts like this. And then the third one would be, of course, what I got, the QuickJack. So I'll talk about why I eliminated the top 2 as a consideration first, but it doesn't mean that the QuickJack is the best pick. It was just the best for me given my situation, my criteria, and we will go through that. All right, so let's look at the first one, and this was actually a fairly easy elimination for me, although this was a primary consideration for sure until I learned of the QuickJack setup. But BendPak MD6XP or similar scissor lift would be a definite consideration if you're looking for a lift. You're definitely going to run into this kind of style. Let's take a quick look at this lift in action. Okay, so let's look at some statistics on what you just saw there. 6,000 pound lifting capacity, that's actually really good. You'll lift just about anything with that other than like a really heavy duty SUV or full-size work truck, something like that. As you saw, some level of portability, we'll discuss that a little bit. Adjustable arm assemblies so that you can space out according to your lift points on various vehicles and everything. Multiple lock positions, so one thing to keep in mind when you get any of these hydraulic lifts like that, you never keep it based on the hydraulic pressure. You always settle it to a physical locking lift point. And this is a consideration because where the heights are on those lock points may be a factor in whether you want the lift or not, because those lock points may be critical to you for whatever reason. So more lock points like this. We've got 23 inches at the first lock, up to 47 inches full rise and a couple of stopping points in between. That may or may not be useful to you because those are the lock points you will be stuck with, something to consider. All the lifts I'm going to show have under a 1-minute lift time, so much faster than jack and jack stands, honestly. It's not really major consideration. But the weight can be because that affects your portability. All right, so let's look at some pros and cons of this thing. I think the elephant in the room for the con is obviously the undercarriage accessibility. So we'll get to that. Let's start with the good news. So the good news is it's portable, so you can move it around from bay to bay. But as you saw, you have to use the mechanism, the hydraulics mechanism, as a lifting jack to drag it around because the thing weighs like 1,000 pounds, like almost literally 1,000 pounds. You're always going to have this thing somewhere on your garage floor at all times. You're not going to be able to lean it up against the wall or hang it on the wall and get it out of the way. So that thing is always going to be somewhere on the garage floor, maybe a consideration. depending on, how much you're walking around your garage and things like that, and if it's in the way. Again, the convenience versus inconvenience. 47-inch max rise, that is definitely a pro on that. That would allow you to do your brake work and everything standing up. I'm actually 6'5", so it'd be a little bit uncomfortable for me, but for most people, you can do your brake work standing up. That would be awesome. For locking positions, again, as mentioned, that's a major consideration. You're always going to be able to find a height that is comfortable for whatever you're working on. And that is actually really important. That's the purpose of your lift, is to make things not only faster and easier, but more comfortable. And finally, as all the lifts I'm going to show, 110 volt AC, but again, you're going to need more probably than a 20 amp circuit. A 15 amp circuit, you're going to blow the fuse. Okay, let's go over the cons. Obviously, the elephant in the room is that, well, actually, that's not the one I was thinking of, but that is one. In the video, you saw how that car barely cleared the lift, and that was like a regular car. Obviously, any car with any lower of a profile, you're going to have to do some kind of modification, like building a ramp around it or jacking the vehicle up with a floor jack slightly. But that is 5 inches is really tall, and that is a major consideration for me, because that would be a major inconvenience for me to have to jack up a lot of vehicles just to position the lift. It defeats the purpose. All right, that's the one. Obviously, the undercarriage inhibition was a deal breaker for me on this. If you're doing things like tire rotations, brakes, oil changes, that's great. Occasionally, I still do engine swaps, transmission swaps, things like that. And while you can do it with this, I have researched people who have done engine replacements, for example. A longitudinal transmission replacement would be a different story. And also, even then, you're oftentimes removing exhaust components, things like that. This would be a major hindrance. And just that kind of broke the deal for me. Again, for you, that may be a different story, and this would be an excellent choice if you're not going to be doing major undercarriage work. The other thing is the ground obstruction. Even if you are working under the vehicle, as you can clearly see, you're not going to be able to take your creeper under the vehicle. You're not going to be able to lay under the vehicle. There's just the entire underside of the vehicle is basically obstructed and off limits. So again, not that it's a bad lift, but again, for my applications, it just seemed like this really wasn't as good of a choice as I had thought it would be. But if there was no such thing as the QuickJack, this actually would probably have been my decision, but a little bit grudgingly. Let's look at the one that would be major consideration. That would be the MaxJax. Let's take a look at this one in action. All right, in my opinion, it doesn't get any better than that other than an actual full rise lift. But let's look at some dimensions of this. Again, you'll see it's a little more expensive than the previous jack that we looked at for providing, I think, a lot more value. But there are some other considerations here. Again, 6,000-pound lifting capacity. That is really awesome. You can see that the height, it's mid-rise lift. So, what is that? Something like 6.5, almost 7 feet tall at its maximum. So that's going to fit in pretty much any home garage for sure. But again, you got to remember the car has height to it. So your ceiling height or your garage door opener height, major consideration, even though the jack will fit in there. Look at the minimum pad height, 4.5 inches. That is really thick. Again, you may not be able to position that under some vehicles without having to jack the vehicle up or make some ramp modification or something around it. You can see really nice 47.5-inch height on it. So again, you can do a lot of work standing up comfortably. You've also got some other considerations. The base plate, that's the base plate around here. You can remove the posts. You can unbolt them from the concrete and set them aside. But again, you've got more than a foot. It's like, I don't know, something like 12 inches by 14 inches or something like that. I've got it written down later. So the question though is, where are you going to put the posts? Yeah, you can unbolt them from the cement, so you can now park, if you had a 2-car garage, you can park both cars in the garage, but then you've got to have clearance along the side of the wall or the front of the garage for at least a foot for you to put your posts, right? So still portable, but some consideration there depending on your garage dimensions. Each column weighs 300 pounds. That's really heavy. Moving that around, every time you want to set up your lift, you're going to move 2 300-pound columns. You're going to bolt them to the floor. I'd sooner use a floor jack. If I was going to do the MaxJax, those posts would stay where they are, and that would be a problem for me, as we'll talk about later. Let's look at the pros, since we're talking about that anyway. Again, the posts are removable. 2 posts, obviously, full undercarriage access. That is just so, what a massive advantage that is for sure. Again, 110 volt AC, but you're going to need 23 amps. If your garage has a 20 amp circuit breaker, you are going to blow that circuit breaker every time you use the lift. So you may need some consideration there. And the other thing is that it has 3-inch adapter pads for the lift points, so you can get up to 50-inch lift. That is crazy. That would really be convenient, again, if you can do it in your garage. The cons, you're going to have to drill this into the concrete. So this is something that you're going to make some considerations for. You need, first of all, at least 3,000 PSI concrete at 4 inches thick. I happen to know mine is actually 4,000 PSI at 5.5 inches thicker. So wouldn't be a problem for me, but also I've never really drilled concrete before. I probably would have a professional come out and install it, and there would be some expense with that. About 130-inch width needed. So if you've got a 2-car garage and you do this and you don't want to keep on removing one of the posts in the center, you're going to have a 1-car garage basically. So definitely some consideration there. It's probably going to take up your 2nd car bay. And again, the post dimensions, there they are, 14.5 by 13 inches. That's a big square. You've got to find a place in your garage along the wall or whatever that you're going to be able to park this thing without it being in your way all the time. So a little bit of inconvenience there if you're going to take advantage of the portability. And finally, the 4.5-inch lowered height is actually pretty tall. There are a lot of low clearance vehicles that you would have to make some modification, either slightly jacking up the vehicle to fit the arms under or whatever. But that's definitely a consideration. If you're getting this for your Corvette, that's going to be a pain every time that you try to jack up the car. All right, now let's get to the QuickJack 5000 TL. This is the one I ultimately decided on. This is an open scissor design, so you'll see very similar to the BendPak MD6XP, but without the undercarriage restriction. But it is also a low-rise lift. Let's take a look at this one in action. Oh, hell yeah. That is actually a really good summary of it. A little bit of exaggeration in a couple of points, but we'll talk about that. One thing though that you will notice, look at the price on that. It is less than half the price of the other lifts, but of course it lifts half as high as well. But that price point is actually really, really good. I opted for, what would you call it, sort of a premium pack, I guess, where I spent $1,600 for mine and it included every accessory possible and all of that. So I thought still well worth it, and definitely, I think, really good value. Let's look at the specifications. You'll notice that this is 5,000 pound lifting capacity, so you can lift up to pretty much a small SUV. Not going to be the right thing for a large work truck like a Ford F-250 kind of thing. There are adapters available where you can get a wider wheelbase on here for like longer trucks with longer wheelbases to get more stability. Again, lots of options available for it. Also, the 5,000 is not the only option. There's also a 3,500 TL, which would be good for compact vehicles, and it goes up to a 7,000 model, which of course is 7,000 pound max capacity if you do have a heavy duty vehicle. So there's different flavors of this available. Also notice the 3-inch lowered height. So that is actually major consideration for me. Even my Trans Am will fit over the 3-inch lowered height, just barely, kind of like that BendPak video with that first car. All right, we've got 24-inch max height. I usually use the taller block adapters to get a couple more inches of height out of that. It doesn't sound that much, but I can tell you at full rise height, it is a very comfortable sitting and working at the brakes or something height for sure. Also, under the car at full rise height, it really got a little underrepresented in the video, if anything, but the guy on the creeper, it looked like he was kind of crunched under there a little bit. I can tell you for a fact it is nothing like that. If you have a low profile creeper, you are amazed at the amount of room. It actually is surprising how high this will lift a car. And the first time you do it, if you've never used a lift before like me, it's actually kind of scary. Another really nice thing about this is the lift point spread. That's going to be the distance that you can place your lifting blocks to accommodate for different wheelbases on vehicles to make sure you can hit those lift points. Between 37 inches, that would work for like a Geo Metro versus 60 inches, which would work on pretty much any SUV. So a lot of versatility with this thing for sure. The other thing is, of course, you can space them out as necessary. So it's just super easy as opposed to using lifting arms to adjust 4 lifting arms. You're really only making one spacing adjustment with each of your QuickJacks here. Again, 110 volt AC, I can tell you that again, you're going to need more than a 20 amp circuit on this. 30-second lift time, but again, you got to normalize that. It's actually slower than the other lifts because it has half of the lifting distance. And this here we'll talk about, you have 2 locking positions. One is at about 12 inches and the other is about at 24 inches. Honestly, this is my only complaint about this thing, the only one. Let's look at the pros and cons, and we saw a lot of them in the video. The first one, obviously, the open scissor design. You have full undercarriage access with this thing, the same as with a 2-post lift. So that is absolutely awesome. It would look like it's a little less stable than the 2-post or the full carriage inhibiting scissor jack, but I can tell you this is as stable as a set of heavy-duty jack stands for sure. That car feels solid on this thing, even at the maximum height. The lowest lowered height, obviously a huge advantage. Now, of course, that's with just the rails. You have to have a lift pad under the rails, so it's actually more like 3.5 inches, but still totally workable for sure, even on low-profile vehicles. The other thing is that 26 3/4 height, if you use the tall adapters, absolutely more than sufficient. If you lift an SUV with this thing, oh man, you've got all kinds of room under there for sure. The other thing I really like about it, there's so many different accessories. You saw them in the video. There's all these different lifting pad heights. There's a brace that you could buy to put across the front if you had a sort of forward heavy vehicle and you wanted more stability there. You saw there's wall hangers, and I've actually hung mine on the wall when I've power washed my floor, for example, and you absolutely can just pick them up and hang them. They're a bit heavy. They're about 85 pounds each for the 5000 model, but you absolutely can do that. You can get these things completely out of your way. So all kinds of accessories like that to help you out. Again, the frame dimensions, you might remember seeing at the beginning of the video where they had the two frames side by side on the floor and the vehicle drove right over them. That's actually the configuration I leave my QuickJacks in. When I'm not using them, I just squeeze them together on the floor and I just drive my regular vehicle over them every day, and I don't even notice they're there. I just leave them on the floor. Very, very easy to keep stored, and then also extremely portable. These things are really easy to move. 80 pounds is not that much. Again, 110 volt AC, but again, you'll need more than a 20 amp circuit. And I can tell you, again, I've got a little more information on these because I actually own them. I can tell you the setup took about an hour, and it was just very, very easy, intuitive setup. It just took longer to bleed the system, I think, out and really get them dialed in than it did all the rest of the setup. All right, let's look at the cons. One major consideration for sure that you would absolutely overlook, and this is super critical, is there is a little bit of rotational forward movement with this lift. So when it's in its rest position, as it lifts, it moves forward a bit, about 11 or 12 inches. So if your vehicle just barely fits in the garage, that is going to be a major frustration for you. It does not lift perfectly vertical. It does lift a little bit with forward angles. So absolutely a necessary consideration if you're going to look at this lift. The other thing is obviously there would be no side access through the vehicle. I don't really see that. I don't really enter a vehicle underneath it through the side almost ever. So I don't know. Some people I researched complained about that. I don't know what they're doing, but there is so much room in the front, and you can fit right under the wheel of the car for your side access. I don't really think that's too much of a con. My garage has lots of length to it, so the forward rotational movement is not an issue for me. That, however, is an issue for me. The one complaint I have, and I swear this is the most egregious, either oversight or omission or what, there's only two lock positions, and for me, honestly, the first lock position is just a little bit too low. And then the highest position is great for working under the car, but it's also way too high if you're not working under the car. So if it had an 18-inch lock position, that would have just been perfect. And we'll show you the locking mechanism on it. I guess you could modify it yourself by welding in a new stop on it. I'm not a welder, but oh my gosh. I mean, this is just the one thing that really kind of just irks me about this. Everything else is awesome. There's another thing about it too, and that is the lift is a little bit finicky. It took me a long time to get it dialed in with the bleeding and everything so that they would each lift at the same time. I had some issues where one lift was lifting a little bit faster than the other one, so the locking positions didn't exactly line up, and you kind of have to finagle it a little bit. When you go up to your second locking position, you have to manually move the locking levers when you want to lower the vehicle, things like that. Probably not a bad thing there because it does force you to check the lock positions frequently. And then lowering the vehicle, it'll lower evenly, and it also has a compressed air device in there that acts as a spring to help the vehicle, not the vehicle to lower, it helps the jacks lower when there is no weight on them. But I found that to also be kind of imbalanced. So one jack, when you get the weight of the vehicle off the jack, one side lowers perfectly normal right away, and then the other one kind of lags behind a little bit. Again, not really big deal, but it's just a little bit finicky. This is the model I decided on, and I can tell you I absolutely love it. So let's take a really quick look at my setup, and we'll just kind of walk through a little bit, and then we'll leave it to you to make a decision on which jack you would get for your home garage. All right, so this vehicle is lifted to its first locking position, and it is a pretty normal height that you would have with your usual jack and jack stands, actually, for doing brakes or working under the vehicle or whatever. If we look off to the corner over here, that's the up and down remote control button over there. One of the things is I am all about convenience, and one nice thing about this is if we look back here, we can see that we've got a lot of hoses and stuff. You have a hose running to each of the QuickJack frames. A really cool thing about that is if those hoses are in your way, you can actually disconnect them. We can see the connection right there. It's quick connect fittings. You can actually disconnect those hoses when you've got the jack in a locked position, and now you don't have hoses in your way. So if you're working at the rear of the vehicle, that is awesome. I chose to put my pump at the rear of the vehicle just simply because it's more out of the way. I don't like walking around stuff all the time while I'm fixing a car. Let's look at the setup here. So what I've chosen to do is make a wire shelf, and you can see I'm keeping all my accessories here. This bar here is so that you can reach under the car without laying on your stomach and pull the jacks out to the sides of the car. You can see I got a few lifting blocks there. The pump mechanism is right here, resting on the wire shelf. You see it's not very big. And then I've got my hoses coming out from under there. This keeps the whole QuickJack system pretty invisible. And when I disconnect the hoses, I've got a little hook I put on the wall right there. I just take the hoses from the QuickJack after disconnecting them, and I just hang them right over that hook. And it just stays out of my way completely when I'm not using it. We're going to take a look at the mechanism here. I'm going to lower the lift. You'll see that it has this cam here. And when you raise the vehicle, that cam, when you back it up now, is going to go over the little notch that's in the frame, so that it will slide down to its down position. Now, the only thing is, you also have to kind of look under the vehicle at the other side, and that one just now engaged. So you see how that works right there, how it slides right over the notch there. Now, the other trick is the other side you've got to keep an eye on to make sure that it also has cleared. So like, for example, the other side has not cleared completely, so the jack is locked on that side, while this side isn't. So like I said, a little bit finicky. It's off by like, just a tiny bit, like maybe 1/4 of an inch. So I've got to lift, make sure both cams clear, and now I can lower the vehicle. You see it lowers very rapidly and nice. So now we're going to lift it up to full height. And again, a little finicky here. We need to first lock to the first lock position. So I'm looking on the other side. It's there too. I'm going to lower the vehicle, and it is now fully engaged mechanically in the first lock position. This is the only first lock height choice that you get. It is enough that you could get under the car. It's about what you normally get with a regular set of jack and jack stands, but it would be nice to have something a little higher than this. This car needs a new oil cooler. You can see that with me working on the car. I do have, I'm 6'5", so it's a little bit abnormal for me, I guess, but maybe for most people this would be a good working height. But I'm leaning over the car a lot while doing this. It's not a very comfortable working height for me doing the engine work. All right, again, a little finicky, as I mentioned. If you are going to lift it to full height, you really can't just draw it right up to full height. You do have to lock it in the first position, let the frames kind of equilibrate a bit, then you can lift it up to the full height. I can tell you the first time I did this, it was really scary. It is kind of amazing how high this actually does get. Same thing, we need to check There's engagement. Both of them engaged exactly the same time in that example there. Typically that doesn't always happen. You really got to keep an eye on it. So now we're going to lower it. Check that the other side is lowered. Again, you want to kind of go and check that the frames are locked. You'll very often find that one frame didn't lock while the other did. Again, a little finicky. The amount of under-car room is just phenomenal, something I've never had before. But then there is a little bit of a disadvantage in that now when we look at my working height, it's actually a bit too tall. So when I'm trying to reach the back of the engine, for example, or trying to reach into the belt area or something, kind of got to be on my tiptoes a little bit, and it's just slightly too high, even for me. It would just be so nice if it had a middle locking point. I can't for the life of me understand why they wouldn't have done that. However, at the full locking position, I can say it is actually a really reasonable height for working on brakes. I actually did struts on a car previously, and it was honestly the easiest time I have ever had because the working height for the wheel well is actually ideal. And actually, when you have one of these, not only does it make life so much easier, but also in ways that you don't often think of. So here's a great example. I've actually got 2 more cars coming in today, but my QuickJack is taken up because I'm waiting on a part for this car that won't be here for 2 more days. But I don't want it stuck here. Obviously, it's not in condition to be driven and relocated. What I typically would do in this situation, set of wheel dollies, and I would move the car onto the wheel dollies by jacking each wheel up one at a time and then moving it, and then of course you got to bring it back, you got to jack up the car again when you're ready to put the jack stands under it again. It is like a lot of work. So obviously with the QuickJack, this is super easy. I just need to lower the car right onto the wheel dollies. I don't have to do any work at all. So you just kind of find little things like that that are really nice. A lot of times people want me to check the brakes on their cars and stuff like that. So I want to check the front and back. I have to jack up the front, I have to jack up the back. With the lift like this, all 4 wheels off the ground, as quick as you can zip the tires off with your impact gun, you can check brakes. There's just so many advantages when you have one of these that you just don't really think of other than the obvious, and they come to you the more that you use this. So I'm going to go ahead and put this car onto the wheel dollies, move it out of the way, and then I'll show you how I store this thing. Again, it is not no hands operation on this. We're going to have to lift the vehicle past the stop. We manually lift it up, rest it on the cam. Have to do the same for the other side. Just a little bit inconvenient, but that's all right. And now we can lower the vehicle all the way down. As you see, the vehicle moves back a little bit as it's lowering, just like it moves forward while rising. Again, a definite consideration if you've got a garage with not a lot of length. You can see if you were trying to accommodate around a really small garage or something, you might put the rear of the car right through the garage door if you weren't paying attention. And look how easy that is. And this is another one of those little idiosyncrasies with the device. The other side is actually already just about lowered. This side is lagging behind a little bit. You see it's a little jerky. Apparently a little air in the system still. But finally it's all lowered down. And now I can just easily slide it out of the way. You saw in the video how effortlessly the guy was moving those. I can tell you that's absolutely true. And it's even more so on my race deck flooring. These are just so easy to move and maneuver. And if I wanted to, I could completely disconnect the QuickJacks and I can hang them right there on my wall hangers. But I've got another vehicle coming in, so I'm just going to push this vehicle over to the other bay and reuse my QuickJacks. So this is really not in my way. When I'm working on another vehicle, I don't have a post right here that I'm constantly negotiating around and just step right over it or around it. It's really not in the way. And of course, when I'm not using it, I just simply disconnect the quick connect fittings. And with the little setup I designed, I just take the hoses, loop them up along the wall, and that's it. You also see I made a little hanger for my remote control, and this lift is completely invisible and out of the way. All right, well, that's my overview and review. Thanks for watching. I really hope you found this helpful. And if you do end up getting a home car lift system, I would love to hear what you chose and also why, and what you like and don't like about it. So thanks for watching. Hope you found this helpful. We will see you next time.